Hi, I'm Sean Burgess, sales leader at Encompass, and today we're cutting through the hype around GenAI to focus on what really matters, outcomes. We're joined by a fantastic panel of experts to explore the barriers and breakthroughs when it comes to delivering real business value from AI. I'm joined by Ren Lemming, founder and MD at Informu Solutions, Alex Thompson, technical director at Oyster IMS, and Jamie Tilbrook, CPO at Encompass. Let's get started. Ren, over to you.
Many thanks, Sean. And I'm looking forward to today's great conversation in the panel about GenAI. So fundamentally, GenAI is about both opportunities but also challenges. And there's a lot of hype that's been created around the opportunities, and we're starting to see some great evidence around that, like the recent UK civil service pilot, where they found that in terms of things like summarising long emails, drafting documents, preparing reports, someone could save 26 minutes a day or 2 weeks a year of their time. But also, of course, we're all aware of the challenges around things like bias, hallucinations, spiralling costs, and the carbon impact of AI. So I wanted to start with framing the first question around, can GenAI live up to those expectations that we've set ourselves? And if not, why not? And what can we do about it? So, Jamie, could I start by asking you that question?
That is a good question, Ren. Yeah, the reality versus expectation is a bit of a challenge at the moment. Let's take a really simple case where you're asking GenAI a simple query, perhaps using Copilot. Now, what Copilot does is it looks across your corporate information to try and find relevant items for it to generate the answer to your question. And you as a user, you have an expectation there that it's going to find the correct information to answer your question. It's going to find a complete list. If there's 20 or 30 things that need to be used, it's not just going to pick the first 3 and try and base the answer on that. You have an expectation that you will only see information that you're permitted to see. And you talked about bias as well, that the information it uses doesn't accidentally introduce bias into the question there. So that's the expectation that we have, but reasonably consistently, technologies in GenAI fall short of that expectation there. And that's what's beyond that AI assistant of summarising emails, etc. It means that many organisations are becoming a little bit reluctant to press the go button and start their AI transformation journey there. That's how I'm seeing it.
And does everyone agree that they're seeing out there that resistance to pressing the button or pressing the button, all the buttons they want to press to pursue GenAI to its fullest extent?
Yeah, so I think certainly in the early phases of AI, there was a race ahead of readiness, essentially, where organisations were looking to adopt AI and be early adopters and saw that there was significant value that AI could drive in their organisation.
Yeah, and I agree. And there's been some other reluctance there, aside from I think some organisations not knowing their use case straight away. But for those that do. The reluctance, there's the info security risk, have we got ahead of and controlled the oversharing that naturally exists from just end users sharing content, getting on with their day job without thinking about those sorts of things. The data protection risks of, well, hang on, what's in this data and what am I sharing it with and what's it doing with that, etc., etc. But you tackle those pieces. And get that bit in order. I think you're then at the point, which is where I think the power of like an Encompass product comes in, which is you're still then faced with, if you put rubbish in, you're going to get rubbish out. And the biggest threat to the power, I think, of Gen AI there is, well, end users are going to just trust what's coming out. And if it isn't any good, it'll start to break down and we'll start to not get the true benefit out of Gen AI that is there. We can't deny it's there. But at the same time, we've got to acknowledge there's the bias, the need for human validation in there as well. So there can never be a true, I trust everything it's saying. But there are definitely use cases where you can be confident in what it's achieving.
Yeah, I think accurate, repeatable answers are really important with AI. And I think over the last couple of years, we've gone through a maturity curve or maturity circle when it comes to AI, where, if I think of being at events a couple of years ago, there was a lot of focus around, well, what can AI deliver for our organization? And some of those initial early adopter use cases that say, okay, how can we drive value out of these AI tools? And I think we're back at that point now where people are starting to identify, well, what use cases can we use for AI? But during the last 2 years, we've seen a real significant piece of work around AI governance, around trust, around data readiness, that's now enabling people to say, okay, we can start to have a mature conversation about what use cases we want to use for AI, because we're now beginning to implement data governance as an example, as a BAU process. And I often talk about a phrase called data euphoria, where data governance is very important, but now we're looking at how do we get the true value out of our content. So it's not purely about data security and data governance, it's about how do we extract value that's going to give us a competitive advantage when it comes to utilizing GenAI as platforms. And we recently ran a BPI network study which suggested that actually 70% of people within organizations are now very comfortable with their security stance around AI. But 60% are still challenged with data readiness. So it's that difference really between data quality versus data readiness. Are we ready to truly implement AI and get that competitive output that we're looking to get?
And I think that readiness, as you've all alluded to, really moves forward more rapidly when people feel they can have trust in accuracy, trust that it's the truth. I'm reminded of that mythical creature, the Ouroboros, which is the serpent that eats its tail and is continually eating itself, but continually reproducing itself. And there is some concern that AI is actually consuming content that it's produced in the first place. And if there are quality issues or bias issues or even truth issues in that content, it's just self-perpetuating. I wonder what people thought to that and how we can really get further trust in the quality of the information being produced by AI, and obviously there's as part of the training process is important to that as well.
I mean, I think the idea that you curate something on all information that's out there is you're going to set yourself up for a bit of a fall, because we all know that we produce some rubbish just in our daily job. So we don't want that to be part of the curation engine. So the idea of passing data to an AI technology that's been curated to some manner, so if I'm a professional working in legal, I want to know that it's curated itself on good quality legal output, opinions that are precedents, etc., rather than everything within my organization. So I think if you get to the point of being able to understand your data, know what's good in there, and know that that's what you've passed to it, and then that's all it's curating itself on, rather than necessarily new content that's being generated out of it, which doesn't mean you couldn't start to pass some new content, but do you know what? You put that through a process, a confidence process of this is good output, we're going to add this in to our data repository. I think that's where you can start to address that concern.
I think AI certainly has the power to enhance and uplift every functional area and process within an organization, but it's really down to the data pipelines that are being fed into these AI tools and the training and the curation of good quality data in order for these processes to work properly. We talk a lot about the Gartner study that suggested that by the end of 2026, 30% of AI programs will fail post POC. And I've done a lot of work with customers around why that is. There's an increase in risk, there's escalating costs of AI, there's also an unclear business value out of the post-POC environment. And what I've found as an example of as an organization I work with to extract entities from a contract, for instance, as part of the POC, they will feed the AI tool a set of perfectly curated, perfectly prepared contracts, and the AI tool will work fantastically, as you'd imagine, because the data is prepared. But as they make that transition into production, the huge challenge then arises of, well, where are those perfectly curated contracts that we used as part of the pilot? Well, actually, they're not perfectly curated. A lot of the amendments are dark. Contracts are scattered across many different business systems, and we actually don't really know where our data is, what the context of those contracts are. So we can't then begin to build those data pipelines into AI. And I think that's where that challenge really arises.
And the example of draft contacts, the things that aren't the final version, is a much better example than me saying that we all create some rubbish in our jobs. You know, we're all professionals that create some good content. It's content that's not the final version.
And it's sometimes where you might fear the machine has taken over and in its mind enriched the content, but not actually done so. You know.
Yeah, that draft is a great example of accidental bias, where you pull back a draft or an obsolete piece of content and use that to answer the question. You've now introduced bias. So you're not the traditional bias we think about, as in race, religion, etc., but just we use the wrong information. But back to Ren's original point here around trust. That's what we've seen, is that people aren't ready to trust AI yet. They can absolutely see the potential of this, but it's like, show me that you know what you're doing. And really, when you think about trust, it's not just going, well, what is the answer? It's show me your workings. How did you get to that answer in the first place? And really what we're seeing here, I think, is an evolution. If we think about traditional compliance, we often talk about audit, and audit is, well, what was done and when. We're now talking about lineage, going, well, why did you make that decision as well? And we've seen a lot of success with our customers seeing through lineage. That's how they build trust in AI and go, oh, actually, it did make the right decision. And often they thought it made the wrong decision, but it did it better than the human. And we're seeing that lineage being really helpful in building trust in AI. But we also can see that that's absolutely going to become part of legislation, and it's going to become part of compliance just as much as retention and security and things like that will be as well. I know, what are your thoughts on that?
I think you're absolutely right there about data lineage and going back as far as necessary, because AI can train on information that can be many years old, but sometimes the older it gets, decisions were made in a different way back in the day, but AI has perpetuated those decisions. So it's an absolutely fascinating concept. Two other points that really interest me from this discussion so far. One is around, let's prioritize where we deploy Gen AI, where we can add value and where we can, in bite-sized chunks, make sure that we can get data quality right. And the other thing that I picked up was it's also about overcoming silos, because the information, even in a prioritized use case, won't necessarily sit in just the one place. I wonder what your thoughts were around that.
Back at the beginning, I talked about data completeness in answering questions there, and the siloing is a really important part of that. If you've asked a question or you need some information that's sitting in a silo that GenAI, the tool you're using, doesn't actually have access to, well, you're not getting that complete data back, and again, you're accidentally introducing bias into the question. That's a really good point, Ren.
And amongst our client base, 15 years ago, there was this sort of vision of having one technology internally for your information, and that has just been blown out of the water with the advances in technology, but also the acknowledgement within businesses that you need a line of business system for various things. And don't get me wrong, line of business systems existed a long time ago as well, but more and more in terms of the projects we get involved with clients, it's can we integrate that with that, because we need to pass data through this life cycle, and we need to manage it there for this purpose, and we need that information here for this purpose, which then creates these silos. So what you need is a federated layer across that to provide the governance, to provide the curation, to support things like GenAI, but also records management, good information governance, knowledge sharing better.
Yeah, I think it's a really good point, Alex, and I think that what AI has really done has almost been that Trojan horse or catalyst to expose some of the wider information management and data governance challenges that organisations face. I like to think that, when I think of how important is lifecycle management, how important is data governance, and how important is trust in the concept of AI, well, even if GenAI wasn't in the market right now, they would all be very important things that organisations need to take a look at.
So if we were to look at practical measures that people can take to improve the data quality of what GenAI feeds itself on, particularly perhaps around unstructured data, what are your thoughts on some great things that people can do quickly in order to move these use cases forward?
So I think you touched on a point earlier, Ren, about integrating silos, essentially. I think that's a really important beginning point. When I look at the challenges that our customers are facing with when it comes to implementing AI, it always comes back to the understanding and the visibility of the data that they have across their organization, and particularly with unstructured data. If you think about 40% of organizations said a lack of data is their biggest challenge with AI, and 70 to 90% of business information is unstructured, right? And it's hidden, it's dark, and the major challenges that arises there is that it compounds that lack of data that's driving AI tooling. So I think where businesses could really look to start is to begin to delve into what a lot of our customers refer to as Pandora's box, which is the multiple silos of unstructured data that sit across an organization, and start to think, well, how do we classify this or understand what data sits across those sources so that we can begin to fuel our AI pipelines? And for me, that's a really good starting point to say, okay, let's go and take a look at what sits across these legacy silos and across our M365 environments and start to understand our footprint of information, not just from a data governance point of view, but what do we have, where is it, what's the context of the data, what's the value of the data to our organization, so we can start to take those 123.pdfs that might be an image of a Christmas party photo or something like that you might want to delete or keep for HR purposes, or it could be an important insurance policy document where you can start to say, okay, this is an insurance policy, it's worth £1 million, it expires on this date, and it's with this third party. So it's starting to build that data foundation across your organization.
And that's where professionals in our industry will start to sound like a broken record, when answering this question, because it's do all the things that we've been talking about for a long time, which is understand what you've got, classify it if you can, clear out the rot, start adhering to your retention policy, deleting the content you don't need anymore. And all of that will start to reduce the data size that you've got, but start to point at the quality data that you've got, and then you can start to extract some value from it. But along the way, if you're using AI as a means of getting some budget to fund starting to do some of these things, then fantastic. Even if AI doesn't work out for you, you've got a good information governance landscape in play, and that only benefits users and the organisation in the long run.
And sometimes organisations are looking for that first killer AI use case, right? And often the best first use case for AI is actually preparing your data for AI. So in Encompass, for example, we utilise OpenAI as part of our classification engine, and that is driving through AI initiatives within organisations, right? So we're taking data, we're using AI to classify it against an organisation's taxonomy, which actually starts to adopt AI within an organisation before they really think about the next phase of how will it have that true impact on our business from a process perspective.
Sean, you talked before about unstructured data, and the thing is a lot of the important information we need is embedded in this unstructured data, and quite often we're subject to inconsistency of formats. Traditionally what we've done is we've had a human supervised machine learning where we would go, this is what a contract looks like, here's where you find this and here's where you find that value. And that works well, and as long as the format stays reasonably consistent, you can pull data out. But now we're trying to find data that's in content across a wide, disparate set of formats there. And this is where your large language models really excel in there, and being able to understand the concept. I'm looking for who this contract is for. You don't need to tell me what the format looks like. And we're now in that age where we can actually get reliable results out of there.
So thinking about use cases for GenAI, we know about things like document summarization, helping draft documents, find information to include in report preparation, etc. But Jamie, we were having a fascinating conversation earlier about the 3 levels of AI maturity, which I thought added some real insight to other potential use cases.
Yeah, Ren, so the way people are looking at this is everyone's on an AI transformation journey. You've either, you're starting with nothing, and how do you get to the point where you're getting return on investment and real value out of this? And we talk about 3 levels there. The first level is your human assistance. So you're just talking about creation of content. Might be, am I eligible for paternity leave? Yes, you are. And then it might even turn into, would you like to apply for that now? That's that human assisted level. And then you have what we call human directed, which is level 2, which is where not saying, can you help me with this task, saying, can you actually do this task for me? Sean's employment contract is coming up for renewal in 6 weeks' time. Could you please arrange the relevant interviews with HR, and when you have approval, draft a new contract for him to sign? That's an example of that level 2. And level 3 is really where you're starting to talk about human supervised agents there, which is more like, instead of do this particular task, please take responsibility for this entire process. We have a sales region in the east of Australia. You are to act as the sales agent there, which means I want you to run campaigns, I want you to do follow-up calls, I want you to finalise sales. So you think about, that's really the level that we can get to in level 3 there, and that's where you start going, well, Sean suddenly as a salesperson, instead of having a couple of people working with him, can have 20 agents off doing this, and that's really the varying levels of that transformation, and at each point the varying levels of return on investment you get out of it as well.
And in order to achieve any of this, we've talked earlier about silos and overcoming them, and using a federated approach, a sort of single pane of glass approach to do so. Did we have any more thoughts in terms of lessons learned and things that people can do to move that agenda forward?
Yeah, so I think that the trick is don't try and boil the ocean and think, right, we've got to curate everything, and it's just not going to then end up getting anywhere fast. So find those use cases and start to focus on those. And then knowing that with the federated technology such as Encompass, and what it allows you to do is have much more targeted approach to this, which is, okay, well, if we've curated this over here, then let's pass that to the AI engine rather than all of the information we've got. And Sean, I'm sure you can talk about that use case.
Yeah, I think exactly when this goes back to the silo challenge, right? That there's, if you're, perhaps I touched earlier on about a contract use case of those perfectly curated contracts, and when you start to push those use cases into production, actually those contracts are sitting all over the organization. They may be in a file share, there may be amendments that are sat in SharePoint, you may have a contract management system that's holding some of those contracts. What's really important is that in production we create those AI pipelines through to data AI pipelines through to our tooling, and I think that's a really important part of what we're doing right now with Encompass. We're taking an organization's data, we're connecting to lots of different data sources, we're analyzing, we're classifying information so that you understand what your data footprint looks like. Where are our contracts? What's in those contracts that's valuable, that could be useful upstream for AI? And by doing that, you're then able to deploy AI agents onto specific document types within Encompass. So rather than pointing at it at a data source, let's point it at a specific business classification or content classification. Go and tell me what contracts I've got that expire in the next 6 months that are over $1 million. Immediately you're going to come back with accurate, repeatable answers because the data has been prepared, organized in the background, OCR, metadata attached, and everything is indexable. So you're then able to make that search more accurate to drive better outcomes and a competitive advantage. And what's that doing for our customers? Well, we're working with organizations around things like pharmaceutical rebates and extracting rebate terms out of contracts in order to find an organization's commercial position in a contract. And what does that mean? Well, actually, there might be a lot of amendments sitting in lots of different systems, and it was taking multiple lawyers 2 weeks to find a financial position within a contract. We've now reduced that to 10 minutes. So it's better use of legal time to have data presented to them that's accurate, and then they can start to interpret that data.
And we've been talking about how with AI it has the potential to, I want to say replace humans, but perhaps reduce the volume of manpower that may be needed for some tasks. Go back 20 years, if you're recruiting someone to do a job for you, you'd want to recruit a professional who knew their onions, and who wouldn't be basing their outputs on rot in their head and unfinished content. So this example here talks that we're now trying to turn this technology into the professionals that we want by curating the content, going, yes, this is what we expect you to know for you to then work for us. And again, don't want to get into that. Well, that means all of a sudden we won't be needed in our roles. That just allows us as professionals to then get on with the other things that we can be doing with the skills that we have.
Take away the mundane tasks, automate the repeatable, and I think that's a really important part of it. Yeah.
And that in turn you can see as empowerment People, it can be a positive benefit for each individual user because they are empowered to be able to focus on what's more creative, what's more related to knowledge work, what's more productive in what they're doing.
People often, it will get people into a position where they're a lot more entrepreneurial in their role as well, right? If we were able to eliminate a lot of those manual tasks that people are seeing, it's like back when robotic process automation came to market, and it was very much a process of let's fix these mundane tasks, automate these mundane tasks so that the end user can start to focus on the important parts that drive value, that drive the competitive advantage within your organization. And AI is going down that exact same route. How do we automate processes with accurate data management as well as part of that, so a fundamental part of that, so that the end users can start to really drill down on, well, how can I create a competitive advantage in my organization? And rather than sitting at their laptop, they're at the whiteboard and they're planning about what they can do next, etc.
Yeah, it's a real transformative time right now where people are, they can see AI can help, but we're actually having to help customers to understand how much it can help. What are the use cases that they can use? Right now, it's hard for people to envisage that, but you show by example, if you were to automate this or this process, oh, great, okay, now we're starting to think. And it's also, there's a change in paradigm in how we interact with data, where we're so used to the concept of, oh, I need to get into this system, so I'm going to open up this system, I'm going to navigate to here and find that. We're now in a conversational mode to work with data, and that's also a big transformation, not only for customers and users of software, but for software developers themselves. So how do we turn those traditional experiences we've thought about for 30 years on how you interact with data into here's this new paradigm for working with it that people will still find intuitive?
Well, there's an absolute paradigm shift in a sense of when we talk to organizations about use case I mentioned earlier of using AI to prepare your data for AI and prepare it, particularly unstructured data. The expectation when doing that work is that you need to provide 150 examples of a document type in order to train a machine learning experience to classify data. Now, if you're able to show a document to AI against a classification taxonomy and say, tell me what this document is, you're then taking away that huge burden that sits within data preparation of having to deeply engage business units to say, what types of data do you use? Can we have examples of that content so that we can classify the data properly? And you tend to get a bit of a bottleneck where people say, I haven't got the time to help you on this, so I'm sorry, right? And that's where we're seeing now a change in mindset of saying, let's utilize AI to classify data. And then all of a sudden, you're then able to start to build these pipelines through to AI.
No, but that automation in classification sounds brilliant, is absolutely essential. I mean, it can help so many governance bits of the agenda around security, around classification, to be able to understand and find something around applying and implementing records and disposal rules.
Absolutely, that's where I talk again about AI being the Trojan horse to drive some of those historical information management practices that have often been neglected, because quite frankly there hasn't been a business tangible reason to do this. GDPR came along and I thought immediately, well, this is just information or content best practice. This is what we should have been doing all along, understanding where our sensitive data is. But it was on that risk side where people said, okay, but it's investing to be profitable. The next phase is, well, actually AI can have that competitive advantage in an organization to say, if we do prepare this data properly, we're going to be in a position where we can drive real cost saving across the business. We can stop escalating costs that we're seeing within AI because of the kind of pumping in more money to kind of fix some of the challenges organizations are facing. And then we drive those business outcomes, which makes us more profitable in those processes.
There's some good points there, Sean. There's something that comes out of that is that I think people need to realize that the time to work with AI is now. I heard someone once say the time for tinkering is done. If you're a commercial organisation and you're not looking at adopting AI to improve your output, then you're going to get overtaken by your competitors. And this isn't something that's going to happen over the next 3 years. This might happen in 3 months. People overtake you because they're using AI. If you're a government organisation, you're being asked to cut costs. This is the way to do it. It's through AI. So the time is now to be looking at this transformation for your organisation.
And that's, you were talking about competitive advantage earlier, and you're sort of pointing out that the time for tinkering is done. It's like, there's a phrase, I'm not sure who coined it, about information advantage, and we live in an information age, and businesses are going to fall behind their competitors. They don't start taking advantage of the data they have and the value that's in it, but also the new technologies that speed up the ability to provide services to customers, products to markets, a whole range of things.
I think it's really interesting that data, I'll go back to the data that it underpins a lot of this, and I think one of the interesting outputs from our Encompass BPI network report was that 75% of organisations have AI-ready data as an investment area over the next 3 years. So I think people are beginning to recognise that data preparation, information advantage needs to happen in order for them to not fall behind their competitors in the market. So the stats seem to align with the conversation here, which is great.
Thank you all so much. That was an absolutely fascinating conversation to be part of. And it's about moving from where we are with information today to say, let's move from information to innovation. And the time, as you say, is now. But I think there was so much in that chat that can really help people understand what the next best steps are, how to move them forward, how to prioritise, how not to boil the ocean at once, etc. But get to the position where GenAI can really be leveraged to improve productivity, save money, and generally create an innovative environment.
Thanks, Ren. And yeah, you're absolutely right. A lot of this is around how do we balance the scales between ambition and execution when it comes to AI. So it'll be really interesting to see how that goes as we move forward. So perfect time to end there, I think. Thank you to our panelists for your insight today. It's been super helpful for organisations that are facing these challenges and opportunities too. And thank you everybody for watching. If today's discussion has sparked ideas or surfaced challenges you're facing in your GenAI journey, now's the time to act. Visit encompass.cloud to explore how Encompass and our partners are helping organisations to unlock real value from their data, securely, responsibly, and at scale. And reach out if you'd like to see the platform in action. And we look forward to continuing the conversation soon.